What is going on, everybody? This is TAETRO, and welcome back to the final installment of the music theory series for the year. And can I just say before we get started, if you've been following along with this series and you've been really working on trying to learn these concepts, first of all, thank you so much. And second of all, congratulations, because it sounds like a lot of you have been learning a lot from this series, and to be honest, I never even intended for this to be a full-on series. I thought I would just do a one-off video, but then that first video did so well, I decided, to keep going. So it really is because all of you show up and let me know words of encouragement or let me know that things are helping, that I decide to do more content around these topics. So if you want us to keep it going in 2022, or if you have ideas for future content, please let me know that in a comment down below before we get started here. But congrats, you've made it this far. Today we're going to cover some topics of kind of how we break some of the rules that we just set up for ourselves in the previous episodes of the series, and also just a couple things I think you should know. This is kind of like a grab bag episode for our kind of final episode here. Today's video is going to be brought to you by Skillshare, and I'll tell you about that and also give you a little painting update later on in the video. But for now, let's talk about a couple things I didn't mention earlier in the music theory series. By the way, if you haven't tuned into previous episodes, I will be building on everything we've already touched on, so definitely go back and watch those before diving in too deep here. Okay, so remember that very basic formula, kind of how this all started, right? Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. That's the major scale formula. Start on any key, play that formula, and it just works. And now you can do that starting on any key. None of these keys are too scary for you because you understand that. And then I kind of breezed over minor and said, for minor, just start on the sixth note of the major scale, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, if we're in the key of C. If I start on A instead of C, we get the relative minor to C major, which is A minor. But what if I told you there were actually two other minor scales that we need to worry about? The one we already know is just called natural minor. It strictly uses notes from its relative major. But the next one you should know about, and you'll probably be pretty familiar with when you hear it, is called harmonic minor. It's all of the same notes until the second to last note, the seventh note of this scale, becomes, we create a half step relationship between the seventh and the root. Maybe some of you recognize that sound. And then there's one more that you probably hear less often, and it's actually a little bit more confusing because it's different when you're going up the scale versus when you're going down the scale. This is called the melodic minor scale. And two notes change during this, the sixth and the seventh note of the scale. We're going to raise this a half step. Same thing as the harmonic minor scale. So did you catch that? The sixth and the seventh are both raised a half step. But then going back down, we play it like a natural minor. So going up, and now going down. Like I said, I think this one is less common, especially in more contemporary genres. But the harmonic minor, for sure, the one we just showed, with just that one little changed note in the seventh, you hear a lot. So really, there's three different minor scales. And on that note, there are lots more scales than just major or those three minor scales we talked about. Those are kind of considered Western scales, I guess you could say. But there are scales that come from many other cultures that include different collections of notes. And I'm not going to get into them all here because I don't know them all. But one other way to look at these scales is modes. And maybe you've heard the term modes before and it sounded a little bit scary. But it's actually not. It's actually really easy. If you can remember this sentence, I don't park, leaving my alternator loose. So if you notice, there are 7 modes. And if you remember, there are 7 notes in a scale. And why did I just say that funny sentence? I don't park leaving my alternator loose. Because they all have fancy names, and I'll put them on screen right now. I'm not going to go through every single one. However, I want to tell you how simple modes are, because all a mode means is instead of starting on the root note of the scale, you just start on a different note, but you play the same notes of that scale. So say we were in C major, but we want to play a different mode of C major. And actually the technical term of the C major scale is Ionian. That's the I in I don't park leaving my alternator loose. If we started on the second note, but played the same collection of notes, we have the Dorian mode. And you can do that for each note in the scale. Just start on a different note, but play the same collection of notes from the original scale. And then you have your different modes. And then the aha moment you should be having is that if we start on the sixth note, I don't park leaving my alternator loose. The A for alternator, which is the sixth note in the scale, stands for Aeolian. So the Aeolian mode is what we know as minor. So two cool things to remember: the actual regular major form of the key, that scale is the Ionian mode. The minor of that key is the Aeolian mode. These are just fancy words. So if somebody throws out terms like, oh, playing this mode, playing that mode, you kind of know what they're talking about. It's the same collection of notes, just starting on a different scale degree. Instead of starting on D and trying to play a major scale on D, no, you just play all the notes of C major starting on D. And then you have a different mode, and do that for each scale degree. If I'm being honest, I don't encounter a ton of practical uses for this in my production, but you might, so it's useful to know. And next, I'm going to tell you about some very important things that have to do with chords, how we might use chords that are not actually in the key that we're playing in, and common ways that that happens in a lot of the music that we know, and also a little thing we like to call key changing or modulation. I'm going to tell you all that right after I show you some of my newest paintings and tell you about Skillshare, the sponsor for today's video. Skillshare is an online learning community for creatives where millions come together to take the next step in their creative journey. They've got thousands of inspiring classes in videography, music, arts, and more. Today, the first 1,000 of my subscribers to use the link in the description will get a free 1-month trial of the Skillshare Premium membership. With the Skillshare Premium membership, you get access to all of the courses on Skillshare, not just the ones that you pick, all of them. So if you want to learn watercolor painting, plus music theory, plus how to make a video, you can do all that. Many of you know I recently decided to take up a new hobby, which is watercolor painting, and I took some of the cool classes on Skillshare to help me improve my skills, and I feel like I've come a long way in the past 6 months. So like, I'll show you some new ones, but this was my first page, just doing some basic landscapes. And then I went ahead and started doing stuff like this latest portrait that I did of Jenny from Blackpink, which I'm really proud of because it looks way better than some of my previous portraits. But yeah, I've greatly improved my skills, I think, in painting, and a lot of that has to do with some of the classes I took on Skillshare, so check that out. But some of you probably came to this video wanting to learn music. You don't really care about painting, even though I can highly recommend it. But you can check out a full-on music theory course taught by an Ableton Live certified trainer in the context of Ableton Live. So for all you music producers out there, that's a no-brainer. I can also highly recommend Young Guru's How to Mix Your Music course if you want to get your music up to a professional level sound. Sometimes we get some of this theory stuff down and our songwriting down and all that, but the mix isn't so good. So definitely take the plunge and improve your mixes. So don't forget, when you support the sponsor, support the channel, use the link in the description, get yourself some Skillshare. But for now, let's get back in to talking music theory. All right back to it. So I said we were going to cover some things that have to do with chords. And I just want to point out a couple different ways we break the rules with chords commonly in songs. And there's 2 ways that come right to my mind automatically. So you all remember, we already talked about the major scale formula, but we build chords on that using only notes included in the key. And we give them numbers based on their scale degree. So we have 1, 5, 6, 4. We're of course playing in the key of C major. And usually we're locked into that. However, there are very common ways that songs often break this. Tell me if you recognize this tonality. What's happening there is we're actually taking the 4th chord, and instead of playing it as a major chord, we are turning it into a minor chord. And being that we're in the key of C, this breaks the rules. This is not allowed because we're actually playing an A flat in that chord. However, many of you, as I just played that, probably recognize that tonality. Let's just do it in a different scale. It sounds quite nice, right? And one of the reasons it sounds quite nice, I just played some inverted versions of those chords, so chords not in their original root position. But when we go from, say, C, which is the 4 of G major, I switched to G major if you didn't notice. And then when I make this a minor chord, now we're so much closer to the 5th of G. It resolves really nicely. See that note relationship there? So when that note is in the top, it's almost like we're walking down. And you probably hear that in a lot of songs, so start to recognize it if you can. All right, so another common tonality, harmonic thing you might hear that actually goes against some of the rules that we already know is we take the 7th chord, which usually, the 7th chord is the weird one, right? If we're in the key of C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, build a chord on B using only the notes we're allowed to use in key. And we get that chord, which isn't really that useful a lot of the times in harmonic progressions. What happens sometimes in a lot of pop music is we, instead of building a chord on the 7th that's in a half step relationship, we actually lower it by a half step. And we build a major chord on that note there. So we lower the 7th by a half step and build a major chord on top of it. And it sounds like this. Maybe you recognize that. We're not going out of key. We're still very much resolving to C. But we are playing a chord that is technically out of key by one note. You can do this in the key of F as well. Just to show you that it works in a different key. So again, what was that? We took the 7th note of the scale, lowered it by a half step, and built a major chord on it. Kind of like a flat 7 major, I guess you could call that. And it still resolves nicely, and we didn't break the key. But what about key changes? I mean, that totally breaks the rules of a lot of the music theory and chord stuff that we learned. We're supposed to stay in one scale and stay in that scale for the whole song. Not true. Actually, there are many different ways we can modulate to different keys in the same song, and probably a lot of songs that you already like do this. You just, if you didn't know what a key change was, didn't realize it. You just realized that, wow, that last chorus really slaps hard. It really gets me feeling good. Could have modulated up. It's a very, very powerful technique. A lot of songs do this. And the most common version of a key change is a step up key change. And what is a step up? You know what half steps are. You know what whole steps are. We're talking about a whole step here. So a step up. So let's say we've got a very basic chord progression here. 6, 4, 1. 6, 4, 1. We're in the key of C major. You know that because I'm calling C major 1. And A minor 6, and F major is 4. So if we were going to do a key change in the most basic way possible, we want to go ahead and play 6, 4, 1, but in the key that is a step up from C. That would be the key of D major. So let's quickly figure that out. 6 is B minor, G is the 4, and D is of course the 1. Now we have the same chord progression, just a step up. And just to hammer this home, notice it's not just C that's a full step up. Of course C, and then a full step up from that is D major. But remember, the 6th of C is A minor, right? What's a full step up from A minor? B minor. Everything shifts, everything translates, it's connected. So the key change would sound like this. One more time through. It's the end of the song. Things are getting crazy. And one thing to pay attention to with key changes is, do the two keys share a chord? And of course, if we look at C major, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that looks good. If we look at D major, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's the same chord. Can we use that to transition? Because if we put G major in between our transition from C to D major, they both share that chord, so it's just gonna like help the transition a little bit. So we go again from our chord progression here. And we've successfully gone a step up. There are, of course, lots of other nuanced ways of doing this, and a step up key change is not the only key change. Some of them revolve around more to do with that concept of shared notes and shared chords between keys. But I do recommend, if you're producing and working on a track and you get to the end, it's just sounding a little too repetitive, try just doing a step up key change at the end. Common song I can think of right now off the top of my head, BTS Dynamite. The final chorus is a step up key change. Go listen to it, listen to the chorus right before the end, and then listen to the chorus at the end, and you'll hear what I'm talking about. All right, so I know that was a little bit of a grab bag of topics, but it is kind of our final installment for the year, so I just wanted to throw some stuff at you to go and play with. But I just want to let you also all know that with the knowledge in this series leading up to this moment, you have enough to be writing your own tracks and really fully understanding how to break down a lot of the tracks that you probably already listened to. So go forth and do that. Don't feel like you have to learn some more concepts before actually creating. Actually, you could have started creating right after the first installment of this video, and you probably could have been creating before that. So take all this information and go make something with it. That would make me most happy. But yeah, we covered things like the different types of minor scales, a brief introduction to modes, common ways we break the rules with chords, and then a little dip into the world of key changes. So I hope that this was helpful, and as you go listen to the music that you love, try to listen for those things. Listen for that key change. Listen for the way they break the rules with chords, and if they do it in ways that we didn't talk about in this video, dissect it. You have the information enough to know what a chord progression should be like, so if you hear those rules broken, go try to figure out how they broke those rules. Part of this now is you figuring out how to problem solve on your own and not just waiting for me or somebody else to drop a video and explaining it to you. You have the knowledge and you have the ability to kind of problem solve around that. Of course, if you do want to dive deeper into some of these topics, Skillshare has some great resources, and use the link in the description. When you support the sponsor, you support the channel, you can get some free access. It's kind of a win-win for both of us. And don't forget to subscribe, turn notifications on for future videos. Let me know in a comment what you thought of this one, and like the video on your way out. For now, that's going to be it. Thank you so much for watching. This has been TAETRO. Have a good one.